On the dot. Jen, are you ready to begin this?
Like drinking here.
Once I find my unmute button, I'm ready. There I
I
am.
mean, that's always the fun part, isn't it? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cassandra White, a grants program manager at the Division of Arts and Culture.
And I am Jennifer Goodo, another program manager here at the division.
This webinar is to help you learn to manage your grants for fiscal year 2026. We are joined by Terry Abstein, the financial administrator for the division. During the presentations, participants are muted and cameras are turned off. However, there is a chat feature available. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat box. And today we are also joined by Sam Brown, Samantha Arroyo, Paul Gabbard, and Sue Ernst, who will be monitoring the chat. They can answer your questions as we go. We will also have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Today, we are going to cover what you need to know about managing your general program support or specific cultural project grant from the Division of Arts and Culture. This includes how to do your contract, how to amend your contract, how to request funds, how to document those funds, and how to do those required reports. This is the grant timeline. This information is all on our website and in your contract if you ever forget. The first step, once you get your grant has been funded, is to submit your contract details. Contract details are the part of the contract that is specific to your grant, your award amount, your budget, your deliverables. Once we review your contract details, we'll generate your contract and send it to you for your signature. Try to have your contract signed and back to us by July 31st. Once your contract is executed, you can start requesting funds. On January 30th, you have a mid-year report due. This is a short progress report asking about the first half of the grant period, July 1st through December 31st. On June 30th, the grant period ends. You'll need to have requested all your payments and spent all your funds by that date. And on July 30th, your final report is due. This is a more in-depth report about your programs, your budget, your evaluation, and how many people you reached. It has both statistical and narrative questions.
Starting with the contract details. To access your contract details, log into dosgrants.com, click Grants on the purple bar, click My Grants from the drop-down menu. You should only be able to see grants for organizations that you're affiliated with. The most recent grant will have a grant number starting with 26. When you see it, click Details. This will take you to your grant record details page. Scroll about 3/4 of the way to the bottom to a section called Forms and Reports. Then look for Contract Details form. This screenshot says View because they've already completed their contract details, but yours should say Edit. This is what your contract details should look like. You see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a button to edit. If you don't see it, you may need to scroll to the right. You can also see these tabs across the top: Deliverables, Budget, Scope of Work, and Contact Info. You need to review and, if necessary, edit each of those tabs. General program support and specific cultural project grants are split into 4 equal payments. Each payment has a deliverable and documentation. A deliverable is what your organization is doing. Documentation is what you can provide as proof of what your organization produced. You need to complete the deliverable and submit the documentation in order to receive a payment. Because there are 4 payments, there needs to be a deliverable and documentation attached to all 4 payments. You can check your application to see what activities you said you would complete and use those as deliverables. But because a deliverable is about what you produced, deliverables and documentations don't need to be a direct reflection of your budget. For example, lots of organizations use their grant award for, let's say, paying their executive director. And that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, you didn't receive this grant to pay your director. You received this grant to produce arts and cultural programming in Florida. Your director is a necessary part of creating that program, but they're not the purpose. So no matter how you allotted your budget, your deliverables should still be about what your organization is doing for arts and culture programming. You also want to keep your deliverables simple and non-specific. We have some examples here. Museums often say they will execute at least one exhibition. Theaters, at least one production. At least one artist contract. You can choose whatever documentation makes sense to you. The easiest thing is typically provide marketing materials or programs. As I said, you have 4 payments. However, you only need to come up with 3 deliverables. Deliverable 1 is auto-populated. It's going to be the same for everybody. Don't change it. To complete deliverable 1, you have to submit a certification from the Grants Manager quiz that we have linked at the end of this webinar, and you have to submit a timeline of planned grant activities. Grant activities being your arts and culture programming. We're going to talk more about requesting your first payment later. Point being, the first deliverable is easy to complete because we want everyone to have access to their funding as soon as possible. The next tab on your contract details page is your budget. You'll see that the budget from your application is already copied into your contract. Obviously, a lot can happen in a year, so if you want to revise or update your budget, you can do that. Specific cultural project grants were fully funded, and I believe general support grants were as well. And you will need to adjust your budget, though, depending on your award amount. I would recommend putting your grant funds into as few line items as possible. When you turn in your final report at the end of the year, your actual spending of grant funds needs to be within 20% of your contract budget. That can be harder to track when you have grant funds spread out across categories. One large allowable expense is so much easier to account for. Just make sure that you're specific about your line items, meaning don't have miscellaneous, and make sure you're aware of non-allowable costs. Note your contract budget should include cash match and in-kind. You can change that too. Just make sure that you're specific about your line items and that you are still aware of non-allowable costs. This is a quick refresher on non-allowable and match-only expenses for updating your contract. You would have considered this when you submitted your application, but as a reminder, these cannot be anywhere attached to your project. A lot of these are obvious. No credit card or bank fees, no private entertainment, no food and drink, no re-granting, no scholarship, no lobbying, no taxes except payroll taxes. Payroll taxes are fine. Just a reminder, you may not use state or federal funds as match. Also, you may not use funds that you're using for match for another Department of State grant. Your contract budget does not show where your match funds come from, but be aware of these restrictions for when you submit your final report. Match-only funds means that you can have this on your contract, but they cannot be paid for with grant funds. That's phone bills, utilities, building maintenance, travel, space rental. These are all going to be in the guidelines, and if you have any specific questions, contact your program manager.
The third area of your contract details is the scope of work. The scope of work is just the 4 deliverables together in a paragraph. Here are some examples from the other year. You'll notice that when they both start with the introductory package of requirements. The last thing we do with the contract details is select a grant contact who will be responsible for all of the correspondence about this grant. This person needs to have a phone number and an email. If your grant manager doesn't see the person you designate on the system, you will need to add them. We'll go over that on the next slide. Your address will also appear on the contract. It needs to match the address on your substitute W-9 form. If prompted to add a new staff member, you can click on your organization's name on the grid at the top of the screen. That will take you to your organization profile. We have cropped these screenshots, so it may not look quite the same on your monitor, but you'll want to find Manage Staff and then Add New Staff Member. Fill out this information, including the email and phone number. If the email or phone number is missing, you will get an error message when trying to submit your contract details. Make sure that you click Yes here at the bottom. The person you're adding will receive an email asking them to confirm their account. Once they accept, they will automatically be added as a viewer. Let your program manager know, and your program manager can give them full permissions to request payments, submit reports, and otherwise manage your grant in the portal. You'll look at your contract details, update your deliverables, your budget, your scope of work, and your contact information and submit. Staff will review your contract details and generate your contract. When your contract is ready, you'll be able to download it from this contract form section on your grant record details page. You need to get your contract signed by an authorized official and a witness. You can do it with digital signatures. Just make sure there's no Adobe security measures added to your document. Once it's signed by both parties, you upload your entire contract, not just the page that you signed, and your current substitute W-9 into DOS grants. You're uploaded in the same place, the contract form. If the contract has security restrictions that prevents us from signing it, you will not have, or you have not included your substitute W-9, your contract will be returned to you. Our division director starts signing off on contracts and getting them executed as soon as she can. Note that your contract cannot be executed if you're in non-compliance at the time. Usually people are in non-compliance because they didn't submit the final report on a previous grant. If you want to check back, you can see the status of your contract in the forms and report section of the grant record details page. It will say executed once the contract process is complete. Here are some things that might interfere with your contract being executed. We can't execute your contract if you're in non-compliance. And again, the biggest reason people get into non-compliance is not submitting reports on a previous grant. If you had a grant last year, please make sure that your report is submitted. There are two places that need signatures in the contract, the acknowledgement page and the debarment, suspension, and eligibility page. If you do not sign the contract in both places, it will be returned to you. We also cannot execute a contract if it's not signed by an authorizing official and a witness. We can't execute a contract if the grantee doesn't have a UEI number in your organization profile. This is a newer requirement, but should still be done for everyone. UEI stands for Unique Entity Identifier. You can get one from sam.gov, linked here. It's pretty quick if you don't run into any issues. If you do run into issues, start a ticket with the Federal Service Desk. This is a totally separate entity from us, so we cannot do anything behind the scenes to problem solve or expedite this. If you don't have one, start that process now.
Time for everyone's favorite part. You worked so hard to get your contract done, and finally it's time to get paid. Okay, to recap, the total grant award will be dispersed in 4 equal payments. Each payment needs a completed deliverable, and most importantly, you need to request the payments to receive them. It's not automatic. Funds become available for request on a quarterly basis. All payment requests need to be submitted by June 30th of 2026, the end of the grant period, at the very latest. However, we recommend you submit your final payment by the first week of June. This will give the division time to process the payment internally and forward the request to financial services, who must process the payment by June 15th in order to avoid delays. Because the state's fiscal year ends on June 30th, the Financial Services Department pauses the processing of payment requests on June 15th. Payment requests approved between June 15th and June 30th will be dispersed in August. But let's start with the first payment. As we've mentioned, the first payment is triggered by execution of the contract. However, to request it, you will need 2 additional documents. the timeline of grant activities, and the grant management certificate. This is an example of a timeline of grant activities. It should include all the events in the year of the grant. If some events are still undetermined, please write that with a general idea of what will go there. For example, Children's Story Hour, theme to be determined, or stage a musical, show to be decided. This is an example of a quiz certificate with the new logo. After the end of this webinar, you can follow this link, and yes, we are going to post the PowerPoint, or you can go to our webpage, click on Grants, and the Grants Management Quiz is the last entry in the drop-down window. Then you need to take the quiz, and if you score 100, you will receive the certificate at the email address you indicated on the form. We don't receive a copy of the certificate, so you will need to upload it on DOS Grants.
All right, if you have executed the contract and you have the 2 required documents, timeline and the quiz certificate, you can request the first payment. To do so, you are going to log on to your account in DOS Grants. Like before, from the dashboard, select My Grants from the drop-down window. Then from the My Grants page, click Details button next to your current grant to go to the Grant Details page. Now, the grant details page is the hub of your grant. Everything starts from here. So my recommendation is to bookmark this page. From here, you can click on the Request Payment button. This will launch the payment request page. Again, you will not be able to request a payment until your contract has been executed. Very simply, the Request Payment button will not be there. It appears only after the contract is executed. Okay, now we are on to the payment request page. Select the deliverable. To do so, click the little square below before the deliverable number. Enter the invoice period's date. The begin date must be July 1st for all payment requests. The end date must be the date of the payment request, and remember, it cannot be a future date. Use the attention field to name who in your organization submitted the payment, so we can communicate with the correct person in case we need to. Please do not put the name of your program manager here. And then you must upload all the required documentation for the deliverable. In this case, for payment 1, we are uploading the timeline of grant activities and the quiz certificate. You do not need to upload the contract. It's already in the system. However, for payments 2, 3, and 4, make sure to upload all the documentation listed for each deliverable. And here's how to upload the payment documentation. Click Add a new file. Enter the title and the description in the appropriate boxes. For this example, we are requesting the second payment. The deliverable description is execute a minimum of 1 exhibition. So the title in the payment documentation box can be the title of your exhibition, and the description should be the type of documentation you are providing. In this case, it would be marketing materials. At this point, you upload a file from your computer by clicking Select File, which will open a window if you're on a PC where you can find the file if you wish to upload. After the file uploads, you will need to click Update. Once you click Update, you should see a link saying View File. If you have more than 1 file to upload, you could repeat the process. So when you are done uploading files, click on the Submit button. But wait, you are not done. Once you click the Submit on the payment request once you click Submit, the payment confirmation page opens. Here you can review the information, then check the authorization box, enter your electronic signature, and then click Submit again. Now you are done. The system will take you back to the hub, that is your grant record details page, and you will see the message, Payment Request has been submitted. Also, you will see the payment status as requested. If the payment request was not submitted, the system will not take you back to this page. If that happens, look for an error message in red somewhere on the payment request page. It will describe what needs to be edited. Another hint is that the payment request has not been submitted is that under the payment status, instead of requested, you will see preparing.
Okay, to clarify, After October 1st and before you submit the second payment request, you need to have expended the first payment, completed the second deliverable, and submitted the expenditure log demonstrating how the first payment was spent. More information about the expenditure log is coming up. For the third payment request, you will have to have expended the second payment, completed the third deliverable, and submitted the expenditure log demonstrating how all funds you have received so far have been spent. The same thing for the fourth payment. You will have to expend the third payment, complete the fourth deliverable, and submit the expenditure log demonstrating how all funds you have received so far, so for payments 1, 2, and 3, have been spent. Here are some basic rules for the expenditure log. The expenditure log should account for expenditure that contains grant funds only. You don't need to enter cash match and in-kind in the expenditure log. It's more work for you and it's not necessary. Each line item needs to correspond to one transaction, which means one check or one EFT only. Please do not group transactions together. Please double-check your contract details to see what budget categories contain grant funds. If you put them in the wrong categories, we will have to return the expenditure log and it will delay your payment approval. You will be updating the same expenditure log during the entire grant period. Therefore, as you add expenditures, please check the total amount for each budget category. You can exceed or come short of the total for each budget category by 20% plus or minus, but no more. Again, we will have to return the expenditure log in that case. Okay, so here's how you complete and submit the expenditure log. Again, let's go back to DOS Grants, and from the dashboard, like you did before, select My Grants, and then click on Details to go to the hub, your grant record details. Once there, scroll down to the Forms and Reports block, the same one where you found the contract details before, but this time click on Edit Log. Now you are on the expenditure log page. In order to start recording expenses, click on Add New Record. This will open a window in front of your log. And here is where you enter all the information about each transaction. You only need to enter information either in the invoice box or the transaction box. If you have an invoice number, you can use it in the invoice box, or you can enter a check number or a direct deposit reference number in the transaction box. In any case, one of those two boxes must have info. The payment date is the date on the check or the date that the bank executed the direct deposit. The payee is the name of the person or organization you paid. While it can be the name of one of your employees, it cannot be the name of your organization. The transaction total is the amount you wrote on the check or sent through EFT. Under grant funds, you can enter the amount you wish to allocate to grant funds. It can be a portion of the transaction total or it can be the total. Obviously, it cannot be more than the transaction total. Leave blank the cash match and in-kind boxes unless you are entering the remainder of a total expense in cash match. For example, if you want to keep your grant numbers easy and your director gets paid in intervals of $1,119, you may want to enter $1,100 in grant funds and $19 in cash match. The deliverable number should correspond to the deliverable for which you are reporting expenses. For example, if you have received the first payment and you are documenting how you spent those funds before requesting the second payment, you should choose number 1. And if you are about to request the third payment and you are documenting how you spent the second, choose number 2. The budget item box is very important. Here you need to select the budget category for which you are reporting grant funds. You need to check the contract details and make sure you are selecting the correct budget category for each expenditure entry. The description box is optional, but here, if you wish, you can give a brief description of the expenditure. When all information is entered, click Update. The transaction will then appear in the expenditure log. This is what the expenditure log will look like. Simply add new records until the expenditure log is complete and up to date. You can review it to make sure it is correct and all expenditures are allowable. You can use the comments box if you need to include information that may help your grant program manager when reviewing your expenditure log. Finally, when you are done, you can click Submit to turn in the expenditure log. You will do this for each payment after the first one. Now, after you click Submit, you will no longer be able to edit a submitted expenditure. If you realize that there is a typo or you made a mistake, you can contact your program manager who will return the line item or even the whole expenditure log, so you can click on Edit and correct it. Also, if we find a mistake, we will return the expenditure log so that you can correct it. If this happens, you will receive an email from your program manager explaining what you need to correct. And here to recap a few things to remember about the expenditure log. Check your contract budget before adding grant fund records to make sure the budget category you select is one agreed in the contract. Check the total of each budget category recorded so that you don't exceed the plus or minus 20% leeway. Also, to clarify and answer a question that comes up often, if, for example, one of your staff performs double duties and they fall into two different budget categories, you can list the same transaction total twice and then allocate 50% of the total amount to each budget category.
Okay, so after you submit a payment request, we review it, approve it, and send it to the Department of Financial Services. You should receive the funds in about 3 to 4 weeks from approval, depending on if you are receiving checks or direct deposits. If you don't receive direct deposit, you will receive a check. We recommend the direct deposit because it's faster and it doesn't get lost in the mail. There is a form that you need to fill and submit to DFS, that is the Department of Financial Services. And here is a link for it. And again, we will send out this we will post this PowerPoint slides. I also want to add that we are not involved in this process. It is between you and DFS. If you have any questions about direct deposit, you can call DFS. The number is on the back of the form. And you can also check on the status of your payment following the link provided at the bottom of the slide. There are 2 reports that you have to submit as part of your grant. First, we will talk about the mid-year report. This is really quick and easy. It's essentially a progress report. It has 2 sections. The first is grant progress, which is text. This doesn't have to be a dissertation, but if you could say specifically what you've accomplished by this point, that would be ideal. The second is impact numbers, meaning how many opportunities for public participation and how many individuals benefited. There are separate questions for virtual participation. The second report that you need to submit is the final report. This one is a bit more involved. This is going to ask you about activities, evaluation methods, impact numbers, and your budget, including your cash match. The budget in the final report is going to be bird's eye categories, like in the application. Your expenditure log should be complete when you submit your final report. You will need to provide support material with sponsorship credit. We'll talk about that in a second. You can find both reports here on the grant record details page. It's about halfway down in the progress reports section. The reports become available several months before the due date. We will let you know by email. Once you submit, your program manager will review it. If we find something, we will get in touch with you.
All grantees are subject to the Single Audit Act. Let me explain what that means for you. The Florida Single Audit Act states that everyone, individual or organization, who expends more than $750,000 in state assistance within a fiscal year is subject to a higher standard of auditing. State assistance means any state funds, not just funds from the Department of State. There's a similar act called the Federal Single Audit Act, which has been on the books since 1984. The Federal Single Audit Act states that anyone expending more than $750,000 in federal assistance within a fiscal year is subject to stricter auditing. Now, my guess is that for most people on this webinar, you're not expending anywhere near $750,000 in state or federal funds. And if you are, you probably already know that. But what's new about the Florida Single Audit Act is that everyone who receives state funds is now required to submit a form stating whether they've crossed that threshold in state or federal funds. And you can do that in DOS grants. Let me show you how. The FSAA is a little different than the other requirements that we've talked about because it's tied to your organization, not your grant. So you'll need to navigate to your organization profile. If you're still on your grant records details page, you can click on your organization name, or you can select organization on the purple bar and then view my organizations in the drop-down menu. Because the FSAA is related to your organization's fiscal year, you'll have to have a fiscal year end date listed in your organization profile before you can submit the form. If you don't have one, or you need to change yours, click Edit Organization. Once your fiscal year end date passes, you won't be able to change it yourself. If that happens, contact your program manager. If you have a fiscal year end date listed and it's correct, click that fourth tab reading Single Audit Act. The day after your fiscal year end date, you'll see a pending record here and a button to edit. The form is going to ask you to confirm your fiscal year end date, whether you share an FEIN with a larger entity, and whether you've expended more than $750,000 in state or federal funds. That's not state and federal funds combined, it's state or federal funds. If you say that you have expended that $750,000 in state or federal funds, you'll be prompted to submit a financial report. The form and the financial record are due 9 months after your fiscal year end date to give you some time to wrap up accounting. As of now, we don't have a notification system to trigger grantees to submit their FSAA form. We're working on it, but we don't have it yet. If you have more questions about the FSAA, here are a few resources. You can follow these links from the PowerPoint, which will be posted on our website after the conclusion of today's webinar.
The final piece of reporting you are responsible for is the Notice of International Travel. The Office of International Affairs is now part of the Division of Arts and Culture. As part of our responsibilities to facilitate trade and cultural exchange with Florida's international partners, we ask that all grantees notify the Department of State of any international travel at least 30 days before the date of international travel is to commence, or as soon as feasible after forming travel plans. To do this, we ask you to complete a form on our website. It is located under the Grants tab in the Grant Forms and Documents section. And just to specify, this is international travel on behalf of your organization, not personal international travel. These are some links for useful information, guidelines, DOS grants, a DOS grants FAQ, and our calendar. For any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your program manager listed here. The team is always ready and happy to assist you. And now it is time for questions and answers. Please feel free to put anything in the chat that you have questions about. I do see a question that was already answered here, that if you've been using direct deposit in previous years, you should not have to fill out the direct deposit form again, but we do recommend you verify that the information is current and active with DFS. And Sammy helpfully posted a payment and financial resources link. Thank you, Sammy. All right, I am not seeing any more questions popping up. I'm going to go back to our grant manager webpage one more time because we have shuffled things around a little bit. You might notice that museums is currently split. So please look for the person who emailed you the link to this webinar and the notice of your grants. So if you're with Sue or Sammy. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your appreciation. All right, seeing nothing else, we are going to end the webinar for today. We will have a recording and the slides posted just as soon as we correct the typo that somebody caught in there. Thank you so much. And yes, we will let you know if the deliverables are okay once you submit them.